Welcome back, rankers. So, overnight, Google's announced 10 algorithm changes. Don't panic. It's okay. Providing you're not doing it tricky to try to deceive Google. However, I know there's a lot of companies out there that do that sort of thing, but if you're just following the standard thing that we say here every week, you should be fine. One of the interesting things that has come out of these changes, though, is that this thing that Google's talking about, extending application of rich snippets and also better page titles in search by duplicating boilerplate anchors. Go and have a read of that if you are so inclined. But basically for a business, there are a couple of things you've got to think about. That is, don't just go out and get a whole bunch of backlinks to your front page anymore with the same anchor text. That's unlikely to work as well as it may have for you in the past. Keep an eye on your rankings and see if these changes probably will only be rolled out in .com at the moment. They haven't said here in this article, but just keep an eye on your rankings over the next week to 10 days and remember this article, okay? So if you see your rankings drop a bit over that period, you might really want to go back and revisit and see what's happening here. The few things that are changing, especially better page titles and also some of the things like this talks about boilerplate content, do indicate to me they're affecting more than the way the search results look, that they would actually be altering the way that Google will be ranking pages. And one of the interesting things that Google's also pointed out here, that there were more results last week. Remember, Google does about 500 changes a year. And one of the ones that they refer to here is the fresh content update, which is basically saying, you know, if we can decide that a piece of content is newsworthy or trending in some sort of way, then we will rank it higher. You may remember I did the show on the download iOS 5 article that we wrote and how it got to number 1 and then it dropped away. And that's because it was topical at the time. And we didn't know at the time that there'd been a change in the algorithm, but the following week, sure enough, Google reveals it. Which brings me to David Meerman Scott's new book that was released today. It's called Newsjacking. And that particular algorithm change I just mentioned about the fresh content and something that's topical and trending ties in really well to David's new book. I haven't read the book yet. I've read the summary. I know, I'll get to the rest of it. In fact, I'll probably buy the audiobook. But because then I can listen to it in the car. But I've seen David talk about this sort of thing before, which is about injecting yourself into a news story or adding to the news story or giving some more coverage to a journalist, giving more information to a journalist that they or a different perspective to their story that they may not have already had. And basically he's saying, generate tons of media coverage, and I can prove to you that that's going to generate you tons of traffic and further expose your brand, and I'll do that in a second. But it's important because this download iOS 5, we didn't actually become part of a news story or get involved with the news media, but we jumped on top of a trending topic or something that was topical, which gave us great backlinks, and it's not dissimilar here. The other one that we jumped on just last week, you may remember we've done a series of articles on the Gasp clothing chain. And, my attitude towards it was, really bad and sort of left a nasty taste in their mouth, the way they handled the whole kerfuffle and the way they treated their potential customer. And, it went viral, but I didn't really think it was going to hurt the brand. Anyway, Michael here was doing a bit of a look-see on this weird comment that we got on one of the articles that we wrote on the whole Gasp debacle. And he Googled the IP address of that particular comment, and we found out that it actually was the exact same IP address as another post written by someone who was employed by Gasp. Now, the likelihood of this person not being employed by Gasp is, well, it's remote to actually be posting with the exact same IP address. Typically, you would think that it would be someone out of the same office who posted, this particular Gasp promo page at a directory. Anyway, so that story, which would have been great if we had it picked up on at the time that it was trending. We would have got a lot more traffic, but we wrote the blog post anyway. And then today, Mumbrella picked up on our story, and you can see here it's talking about us. And we got a nice backlink from Mumbrella, which was really nice. So we wouldn't have got that had we not been willing to comment on things that were happening, that we saw happening in the news and that were topical. If we go back to David Meerman's Scott page, I said I was going to give you proof about how media coverage will increase your search traffic. And by the way, if I just have a quick look now, it's been hours since the Mumbrella article went live, but we peaked, I think it was about 25 people at one time. Now it's dropped back to about 3 people a minute, and they're coming in from Mumbrella, as you can see there. But it's a consistent thing. If someone else tweets out that Mumbrella article, we'll get a few more hits on that as well. And for us, we're seeing here that, hey, you know what? People are coming to the blog and they're looking at gasping for air, and then they're going off and looking at some of the other content that we've produced. So that's good for us. It exposes our content to new users through injecting ourselves, well, not injecting ourselves, but contributing to a news story. And, David, I learned something very valuable from David when he spoke here last year. He talked about how that a journalist called him for a comment on a particular topic or a particular article he was writing. And David I think it was too buggered to call back at the time. He was stuffed. And so I thought, I'll call him back in the morning. Called him back in the morning, and it was too late. The article had already been written, and he didn't need David's input anymore, and David lost opportunity to promote his brand. That's happened to me a lot. So now when a journo calls me, I make sure I return their call as soon as I get the message, if I can't take the call immediately. But one of the things that, one of the examples that David's put in here, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to reading it, is that he stuffed Newsjacking with tons of examples, including Rick Perry and a few other people. The one that interests me is Rick Perry, because he had a incredible faux pas. In case you don't know who Rick Perry is, he is a presidential candidate for the Republican Party. Sorry, a presidential nominee for the... No, it's not the nominee yet. He's trying to get the nomination from the Republicans, along with a bunch of others, including one guy who I've talked about a lot before on this show, and that is Ron Paul, Herman Cain, Mitt Romney, Rick Santorum. Google his name, you'll get a few laughs as well, and a bunch of others. Anyway, I was telling you before that getting news does increase searches. What I'm looking at here is Google Trends, and I did this 4 years ago during the presidential race for the Republican Party to see who was going to be their nominee. And I was particularly interested by this libertarian candidate. A lot of you will know I'm a libertarian, called Ron Paul, who happened to be running for the Republican Party. And the numbers back then were astounding for search compared to the other candidates. Anyway, didn't get the nomination, even though his search figures were through the roof. But the curious thing is that his search volumes didn't drop off towards the pointy end of the nomination. It was just that his competitors got so much more search traffic, and eventually Senator John McCain won the nomination, even though that he didn't have the search volume early in the campaign. What's happened here is, and what I'm particularly interested in, is the Rick Perry faux pas. He had a terrible moment in a televised presidential debate where he couldn't remember the name of a department he wanted to cut. He sort of was having a bit of a moment, and Jon Stewart suggested he should have faked a stroke, and things would have played out a lot better for him. But this F here coincides with this ABC News story here, Rick Perry oops. And you can see whenever we have these letters, they all correspond to an actual news story. Whenever you see that, you will see spikes in traffic volumes. Okay, and these are the this here is what we're looking at, the search volume, and this is the amount of what's happened, amount of talk in the news. Now you can see Ron Paul here doesn't get a lot of talk in the news, but when he does, it corresponds to the search volume. And similarly, you know, the graphs are matching up for the other candidates. This Herman Cain one here, Herman Cain versus Sharon Bialik, that was a story about sexual harassment. This was a story about poor old Rick Perry having a very bad moment, but funny. Look it up on YouTube. Google it. It's easy to find. Just Google Rick Perry oops. It'll come up. And you will see here, well, that one's not on the screen because I'm only looking at the last 30 days of search traffic. But these things, whenever you get news coverage or media coverage, it will increase your search volume. And yeah, we see that time and time again. We're looking forward to seeing the stats tomorrow from the Gasp story that ran today because on Umbrella, because it gave us a big spike in traffic last week. If I just bring up our analytics from last week, you can see that, and also the iOS 5 story, you can see there's massive spikes in traffic, and whilst traffic in and of itself isn't important, if you're writing a story or if you're producing content that is of interest to people who may also be interested in the products and services that you offer, it doesn't have to be directly related, write the story, get the traffic, and it'll expose more people to your brand. You'll get some backlinks. You can see here, this is when the blog post went live last week, and the Umbrella story went live today, so we haven't got that data today. Back here, this last bigger spike was the iOS 5 story. So go and get David Meerman Scott book. It gives you a lot of ideas. One of the things David said when I last heard him speak is try to be the second paragraph in the news story that's related, especially if it's related to your industry. And I think that's really great advice. And there's a lot of techniques in here of how to monitor and keep up with stories that might be breaking that are in your industry. And for me, it's just almost a different way of looking at things. That iOS 5 story, it wasn't until late in the afternoon that the guy who wrote it, Michael here, said, no, someone else said it. Someone else said, hey, you know what? That thing that you did with iOS 5, that'd probably make a good blog post. And we've all just gone, oh my God, of course it would make a fantastic blog post. And trending right now at the time, and that's why it was written. But sometimes it's just about thinking, you know, as David said, with a real-time mindset of what's happening and how you can add to that conversation and be a part of that conversation. And that is it for this week's show. Hopefully that's helpful. We'll see you next week. Thanks very much. Bye.